the Earl of Stonebridge laughed on a Tuesday morning in October, in front of 43 witnesses, and Portia Halcombe neither flinched nor looked away. Now, my friends, I want you to remember that laugh. Hold on to it, because everything that follows, every document unearthed, every truth dragged into the light, every moment when power discovered that it had been sitting on a cracked foundation, it all begins with that sound. A man who believed the room belonged to him, amused by a woman who had the nerve to disagree. The auction was held in the assembly rooms of Bellwood Township, a draughty stone hall that smelled of damp wool and last season's firewood. The Harcastle estate had fallen into debt faster than anyone had expected. 11 properties were to be sold. Investors from 3 counties had arrived in fine coats and finer carriages. They had come for the Harcastle farmland, for the timber leases, for the mill on Fenner Creek. They had not come for Lot 7. Lot 7 was the Aldgate lockkeeper's cottage, along with, and here I quote the auctioneer's catalogue directly, as Portia did, the associated navigation rights recorded under the original Crown Grant of 1791. The cottage itself was a wreck. Half the roof had fallen in during the previous winter. The lock mechanism hadn't been operated in 11 years. The Bellwood River, which the lock was built to control, had slowed to such a shallow crawl through that particular reach that most men in the room had simply assumed it no longer mattered. Most men, not all. Lord Everard Quincy, Earl of Stonebridge, sat in the front row with his estate agent, Mr. Rain, beside him. Lord Quincy was 36, dark-haired, and possessed of the particular confidence that comes not from triumph, but from never having been seriously tested. He wore a coat of deep charcoal wool, and had not opened the auction catalogue once. He didn't need to. Men like Rain existed precisely so that men like Quincy would never need to think about details. Portia Halcombe sat in the 4th row. She was 29. Her coat was clean but not new, and the satchel on her lap had been her father's, a surveyor's bag, stiff brown leather, with a brass clasp smooth from years of use. She had read the catalogue 4 times. She had brought her own copy of the 1791 Crown Grant, traced from the county archives the previous spring. When the auctioneer reached Lot 7 and announced the opening bid, 3 men in the front rows laughed outright. The 4th row found this less amusing. Portia raised her paddle. Lord Quincy turned. He looked at her the way a man looks at something mildly unexpected, a robin appearing in December. Then he leaned toward Rain and said, "Not quietly enough. Someone should explain to the surveyor's daughter that sentiment doesn't substitute for sense." Several men nearby heard. Several men nearby smiled. Portia kept her paddle raised. "Now, my dear friends, I have been telling stories for longer than some of you have been drawing breath, and I will tell you this plainly: the most dangerous person in any room is the one who has done the reading that everyone else has not. The laughter that morning was paid for, eventually, at a very significant rate of interest. Rain bid on behalf of Stonebridge. Portia bid back. The room, which had been bored, became curious. The numbers climbed past what any rational person believed the ruined cottage was worth. At £380, Rain glanced at Lord Quincy. Lord Quincy gave the smallest nod. Rain raised the bid. Portia raised hers. £410. She could not go higher. Her father had left her £420, a set of surveying instruments, and 3 notebooks she had been reading since the morning of his funeral. £410 was everything. The auctioneer looked at Rain. Rain looked at Lord Quincy. Lord Quincy looked at Portia with an expression caught somewhere between amusement and mild irritation, the face of a man who cannot decide whether to be annoyed or entertained. Then Portia stood. "Before we proceed," she said, "I would ask that the full terms of the associated navigation rights be read aloud as recorded in the Crown Grant." The auctioneer blinked. "I beg your pardon. Page 9 of the sale catalogue. The navigation rights associated with Lot 7. The buyers have a right to hear them in full before bidding continues." Rain's face shifted. Not dramatically, just the faintest tightening around the eyes. The way a man's face moves when he recognizes a problem he cannot immediately solve. The auctioneer found the page. He read, "The Aldgate Lock and its associated works shall carry permanent and exclusive right to regulate the passage of all waterborne commerce through the Bellwood Narrows, including but not limited to timber, grain, and all freight of whatever nature, for a distance of 2 miles in either direction, in perpetuity, pursuant to the original Crown grant." Silence fell over the assembly room, the way silence falls in a church, sudden, total, slightly embarrassed. "My friends, allow me to explain what those words meant in practice, because I assure you, the moment they were read aloud, every man of business in that room began performing the same calculation. The Bellwood Narrows were the only stretch of the river narrow enough to be locked. Below the Narrows, the river widened and ran freely to Market. Above the Narrows, upstream, sat the Stonebridge estate, and every autumn without fail 10,000 board feet of Stonebridge timber were floated downriver to the mills. Through the Narrows. Through the lock. Through Lot 7. If you owned the lock, you controlled the passage. And the Crown grant said quite clearly who owned the right to regulate it. Rain did not bid again. He couldn't. To bid further would be to acquire, on Stonebridge's behalf, property that carried conditions restricting commercial use by any landowner already controlling more than 5,000 acres in the Bellwood watershed. Stonebridge held 11,000. Portia had read that condition 3 weeks earlier. She had said nothing about it until it mattered. The hammer fell at £410. She sat down before her knees could embarrass her. Outside, as the auction continued through its remaining lots, Lord Quincy found her on the steps. "You planned that," he said. It wasn't quite an accusation. It was almost admiring. "I read the catalogue," she said. "My agent read the catalogue." "Your agent read what he expected to find." A muscle moved in his jaw. "What are you intending to do with a broken lock and a roofless cottage?" "Own them," she said. "That is the first requirement of any plan." She had heard that somewhere. She delivered it without smiling. "If you're finding this story as absorbing as I am, my friends, I do hope you'll stay with us here at Moonlight at Bellwood. There is always a warm fire, and the stories are never quite what they seem at first now." Back to the Narrows. Portia's father, Edmund Halcombe, had spent the last 4 years of his life as a surveyor contracted to Bellwood Township. He was a quiet, methodical man who believed that land told the truth to anyone patient enough to listen. In his final months, before a fever took him in March, he had become convinced of something troubling, that the Bellwood River had not simply slowed, that it had been made to slow, that somewhere above the Aldgate Lock, the old channel had been altered, narrowed, perhaps, or partially blocked, in a way that reduced the flow to tenant farms downstream, while preserving the depth needed for Stonebridge's autumn timber runs. He had filed a report with the township. The township had forwarded it to the county land office. The county land office had, it appeared, passed it to the Stonebridge estate solicitor for review. Nothing had come back. Edmund Halcombe had died believing that the river had been tampered with deliberately, that someone in authority had looked away, and that the families of the lower Bellwood farms would continue to pay the price. Portia had brought his notebooks. The morning after the auction, she and her father's old colleague, a former drainage inspector named Mr. Griggs, 62 years old, and entirely unimpressed by everyone, drove out to the Aldgate Lock in a hired wagon. The lock was worse than the catalogue had suggested. The gates had seized, moss covered the stone sills. But upstream, 50 yards past the tree line, Portia found what her father's third notebook had described. A new weir, stone and timber, recently enough that the mortar had not fully grayed, not on any county map, not in any Harcastle estate inventory. Built, her father's notes estimated, Within the past 15 years, positioned to divert a significant portion of the upper Bellwood's flow into a private mill pond on Stonebridge land, where it served the estate's sawmill year-round, while leaving the lower river diminished. Mr. Griggs crouched beside the weir's footing. "This is deliberate," he said. "Yes," said Portia. "Your father knew." "He suspected. I needed the lock to prove it." He looked at her for a long moment. "You spent everything you had." "He spent everything he had too," she said, trying to be believed. "I spent mine on a way to make them listen." She turned back toward the wagon before her voice could do anything inconvenient. 3 days later, Mr. Rain arrived at the roofless Aldgate cottage with a legal notice and the expression of a man delivering disagreeable news that he personally found quite satisfying. He informed Portia that the sale of Lot 7 was being challenged. The Harcastle creditors, he said, had retained counsel arguing that the navigation rights were not validly included in the auction, that they constituted a separate asset requiring independent valuation. "The catalogue stated them explicitly," said Portia. "The catalogue may have been in error. The catalogue was prepared by your office." A very brief pause. "I am merely the messenger." "Then carry a message back," she said. "Tell whoever prepared this notice that I intend to open the lock gates within the week, as is my legal right, and that I expect no interference with the navigation channel." Mr. Rain's composure did not crack, but it developed a hairline fracture. "I would counsel caution, Miss Halcombe. You are a young woman without legal counsel, challenging an estate of considerable standing." "My father counseled caution for 4 years," she said. "It did not serve him." Lord Quincy came to the lock on a grey afternoon, with 2 men behind him and no particular expression on his face. He watched Portia and Mr. Griggs working to free the seized mechanism. He watched for some time before he said anything. "You're going to open it," he said. "Yes." "Do you understand what that does to my timber run?" "It restores the channel to its documented flow," she said, not stopping work. "What that does to your timber run depends on choices your estate made 15 years ago." His gaze sharpened. "What choices?" She showed him the weir. He did not speak for a long time. He walked around it. He looked at the stonework, the mortar, the positioning. He was not a man who performed ignorance, and he did not perform it now. "I didn't know this was here," he said finally. "I believe you," said Portia. "That may be the most damaging part." He turned to her sharply. "You have thousands of acres of working timber," she said. "Your autumn float runs free of toll or delay. You have benefited from this weir for 15 years, while the farms below your land watched their wells run low and their grain crops fail, and you never asked why your river ran full while theirs ran dry." His jaw tightened. "That is a serious charge." "It is an accurate description." He looked back at the weir. Something crossed his face. Not shame, not yet, but its precursor. The uncomfortable flicker of a man who has just understood that not asking is its own kind of answer. When the lock gates finally moved, on a Thursday morning, after 4 days of work, the change was not dramatic. No flood, no crash. The river simply deepened, slowly, as the old channel remembered itself. Downstream, within 2 days, the first tenant well began to refill. Within 10 days, Rain had filed a formal legal challenge to her ownership. Within a week of that, someone had set fire to the county land records office. My friends, I have sat by enough fires to know that fires which begin in locked buildings after hours during active property disputes are rarely accidents. I suspect you know it too. Portia and Mr. Griggs reached the building within the hour. Smoke was thick in the rear corridor. Lord Quincy appeared in the alley before she expected him. "I know where the oldest records are kept," he said. She did not ask how. "Then we go together." They found in a tin-lined cabinet at the back of the archive not only the 1791 Crown Grant, but a set of survey ledgers filed by Edmund Halcombe. The originals, the ones the township claimed, had never been received. They had been received. They had been filed, and beside them, in a folder bearing Raine's initials, was a construction authorization for the Stonebridge weir, signed by Raine alone, with a notation in the margin, Lord Q, verbal approval confirmed. Lord Quincy read it twice. "He told me it was drainage improvement," he said quietly. Portia said nothing. "I signed nothing." "I know," she said, and that is exactly what he relied upon. They came out of the building coughing, documents wrapped in Lord Quincy's coat. Raine was across the street. When he saw what they carried, his face went through several expressions before settling on something cold and calculated. "You cannot prove I set that fire," he said. "No," said Lord Quincy. "But I can prove you authorized illegal works using my estate's name without my knowledge, suppressed a filed government survey, and initiated a fraudulent legal challenge to a valid sale. That should be sufficient." Raine looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked to his carriage and left without another word. The county constable, who had arrived to manage the fire, received a description before the carriage was out of sight. The legal challenge to Portia's ownership was heard 6 weeks later. The court upheld the sale. The navigation rights had been explicitly catalogued. The creditors' counsel withdrew their objection once the construction authorization and suppressed survey were entered in evidence. The injunction was dissolved. The lock returned to Portia's management. Raine faced separate proceedings. 3 former Stonebridge clerks gave statements. The weir was ordered removed at the estate's expense. On the day the verdict was read, an older farmer near the front of the gallery began to cry. Not from weakness, from the particular relief of a man who has carried something too long and has just been told he can set it down. Portia did not feel triumph. She felt the absence of a weight she had grown so accustomed to that she had forgotten what standing without it felt like. Lord Quincy found her by the courtroom door afterward. "Your father's survey is being entered into the official record," he said. "I've instructed the estate to make a formal public acknowledgement of the suppression." She had not expected public. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said, "I did." He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, not the cool assessment of the auction room, but something arrived at through difficulty, through the specific discomfort of a man discovering he had been wrong in ways he could not simply attribute to others. He filed his findings correctly. He should have been heard. "He should have been believed," she said. "Yes, I intend to say so in writing." They stood in the courthouse doorway while the November rain started, as it tends to do in this part of the country. Without drama, just a quiet, steady falling. The Bellwood Canal Users' Council was established the following spring. Portia held the lock rights. The council held oversight of the river's management. No single landowner could close or alter the channel without a vote. Records were kept in the public archive. In the Aldgate cottage, which had been given a new roof over the winter by a crew of tenant farmers who had shown up one morning with shingles and did not leave until the work was done. Above the door, someone had carved a name. Edmund Halcombe, surveyor. He measured this valley before the powerful were ready to hear it. Portia did not learn of the carving until she arrived to open the council's first meeting. She stood in the doorway for a long time. Lord Quincy, who had come early, stood beside her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the moment did not already hold. Their courtship, such as it was, unfolded in the way that courtships do when both parties have already shown each other their worst moments and their most honest ones. Slowly, without performance, with the slightly startled quality of two people who had not expected to find something valuable in a difficult place. He told her, the following autumn, standing beside the restored lock, watching the first full Stonebridge timber run pass through a channel that now paid proper toll to use, that his laugh at the auction had been the greatest professional embarrassment of his life. She told him she intended to remind him of it regularly. He said that seemed fair. If you have stayed with me this long, my dear friends, then I think you already understand what this story is really about. It is not about a lock, or a legal document, or a man being humbled. It is about a father who told the truth before anyone powerful was ready to listen, and a daughter who found a way to make that truth impossible to ignore. It is about the kind of knowledge that accumulates quietly, in notebooks, in archives, in the hands of people whom the powerful have decided do not count. And what happens when that knowledge finally finds its moment? The lock still turns, the river still runs, and below her father's name, above the entrance to the Bellwood Canal Council's office, Portia Halcombe added one line in her own hand. What serves everyone must never be hidden by one. The man who laughed at the auction learned in the end, to be grateful she had not laughed back.